review something we did in class. Okay, so we did like a brief introduction last week to just digital media in general. We went over stuff like file types, like what are different types of image files, okay? JPEG, PNG. And you know that they have color, okay? They store lots of information like color information and resolution, which is how many pixels an image is, okay, if it's a raster image. But hopefully these things will just kind of pop into your mind as we go through the rest of the stuff. Okay, so Inga, you weren't here last week, but the only thing we went into really is just the interface of Photopea. And it's very similar to Photoshop. Okay, you're going to have an ad on the side here because it is free software, but that's kind of, it's a plus. And you can, I think if you create a free account or something, you can remove the ad or something like that. But we also have Photoshop CS5 on all these lab computers anyway. So you're welcome to use either the internet here and use Photopea or use Photoshop because, like I said earlier, you will be able to do both. I think so. Okay. And so, Inga, it's as easy as just opening up an internet like browser, like Chrome. That's what we use here, and then just go to photopea.com, and that's it. There's no logging in or anything like that. Okay, you don't need an account to start using it, and you can disconnect from the internet after you've opened the program, and the program will still carry on working. Okay, you don't have to be constantly connected. And it basically uses PSD files, which is the Photoshop format, okay? So it completely works with Photoshop files, natively, as we say, in other words, as if it was Photoshop itself. Okay, so, yeah?
I also want to ask, so for example, if you have layers in Photopea, will those layers be visible when you put it into
Yes,
Photoshop?
yes.
Okay.
It is using the Photoshop format, so they're completely compatible with one another, okay? So you can make a document in Photoshop, and you can edit it to your heart's content in Photopea. You can save it, and then you can open it back in Photoshop, or vice versa. You can start it in Photopea and finish it in Photoshop. Okay, you can use either program on the same file the whole time. But because it is running through your browser, instead of saving a file like you would in Photoshop, for example, to your hard drive, and every time you save, it just overwrites a copy of that file on your hard drive. Because you're connected to the internet, when you hit save, it will download a PSD to your downloads folder or something instead. Okay, so it takes a little bit of time for that download to happen if it's a big document. So that's the one difference. But you can also load PSD files into Photopea that you already have saved on your computer. Okay, but right now we're just going to start with a blank document. So Inga, have you ever used Photoshop or anything like that before? You have? Oh, all right then. So this shouldn't be too foreign to you, okay? We've got all of the menu functions up here at the top. And then we've got the toolbar here on the left-hand side, and then the layers palette over here with channel information for colors, okay, which we won't really go into anyway. And we've got some swatches and color stuff over here, and then in this panel, we've got properties, little abbreviations there, okay? So it's pretty much the same, it should be quite familiar to you. So we're going to cover chapter 3, 4, and 5 today, and they're kind of the major, like, foundational chapters of image editing, which are basically layers, masking, and selections, okay, and being able to manipulate layers and stuff like that. So that's probably the most basic principle that I hope you'll come away with today, is that these things all work in layers, and you can think of layers as physical layers as well. That's probably the easiest way to do it. If you imagine that your document is like a stack of pages, okay? Each one of these is a layer. And the one that I see at any given time is the topmost layer, okay? Why? Because these pages are not see-through, okay? But that is something you can do with image editing, which is pretty cool. So, okay, it's a little bit translucent, I get it, but it's pretty much opaque, okay? So I can only ever see the top layer. Imagine the stack is like this. If I want to see what layer is underneath this, in other words, the other page, the second layer, I have to turn this layer off or take it away. I have to see through it, okay? I can't see through individual pages like this. But because you have transparency, because it's all digital, okay, you do have that function. So it's a bit like stacking, you know, an overhead projector, right? And they use transparency film, it's like clear film. Think of it like a piece of glass if you want, okay, with the painting on it. So you can actually have parts of the layer that are transparent that lets you see other layers below them. and each one of these layers is just, you know, like an image by itself, like a raster image stacked on top of another one, stacked on top of another one. And sometimes there's holes in these things, and you can see through all the images together, so you see a composite of all these layers. Okay, so there's an example that in these notes, and just to remind you, the notes are on LMS, and there's also a PDF on the comment folder, and I'll open them up in the background actually, so you know where to find them if you want to refer to it. But there's a little graph or like a little picture here that just gives you a demonstration of what layers, what the effect of layering would do in your documents. Okay, so if you have the bottom layer, okay, your background layer, and by default when you open a new document, you'll probably have a white background, okay? In this case, it's black, okay, just for example. And then you have another layer on top of that, which is basically just a circle, okay? Because it's printed on a white page, yes, the background looks white. That's because the page can't accurately show transparency like you can in the digital world, okay? And then we have a third layer of that, which is a little blue square. And we have a fourth layer that are a bunch of diagonal yellow lines, okay? And then when you view all those layers placed on top of one another, you get the final image over here, okay? Which is a composite, like a composition of all these layers. In other words, it's all the layers stacked up on top of one another, and you're looking into the document like that. Okay, and that's what the final image is. The cool thing about this is that you can turn these layers on and off. So if you decide that you've got a few pictures that you want to show in a composition, and you don't want to show the second picture, and that picture is living on the second layer, you can turn that layer off. And then you will just see the results of, say, the black background, blue square, the yellow stripes, okay, and you won't see that. But we're going to go through the program today. We're going to make some layers and some shapes and some other stuff, and then you'll work with them, you know, hands-on, and then you'll understand layers a bit better. But it might seem very complex, and as we get into it, you'll see it's not that scary. But it's one of the most basic principles, and that's how you get any kind of meaningful detail into your documents. Oh, there, Megan.
Sorry.
Well, not meaningful detail, but that's how you can work with lots of different images and make compositions in Photoshop. Okay, it's not just for like editing photos and that kind of stuff. You can do a lot of other really amazing effects with it. Okay, which we can use in when we're presenting stuff. Or just communicating visually in any way. Okay, so layers, yeah, you understand layers, Megan. So, okay, and the layers live over here. They're on the right-hand side of the program here, okay, this layer panel. So right now we don't have any documents open, so I'm not seeing anything in layers, okay. So we can just go ahead and create a new project. All right, so we're gonna go File, New. Okay, and then you'll see some templates on the side. They're pretty awful. Let's start with, let's do a print project, okay. So we'll go over to this little print tab over here, and we're going to select A4. Okay, but that's going to give us a portrait A4, we want a landscape A4, okay. So I'm going to just flip this around using this little switch the width and height button. Okay, and then when I'm happy with that, I'm just going to go create over there. Right, there we go. There's my canvas. So, hey. Oh, okay. So you're going to use your zoom tool. Okay, you're going to be zooming into it if yours is too small. So you just go down to the bottom of the toolbar on the left-hand side there, and you select your zoom tool, and then you can click. Okay, and if you click, it zooms in. If you want to zoom out, you hold in the Alt key. Okay, and then you'll see that magnifying glass changes into a minus, and then you just click some more, and then you can do that. Or the easiest way to do it is to hold in the Alt key with any tool selected, okay, and then just scroll the mouse wheel in and out. All right, and then if you remember last week we went to View, Rulers, and we turned on Rulers. Oh, you can't see my toolbar, it's cut off here. Let me make this smaller. There we go. Okay, so I've got my ruler showing over here. And, Jesus, it's hard to see. Yeah, there are my rulers over there with all of the markings, okay. And I just went to view rulers to turn them on, and then when I hold in Alt and I scroll back and forth, I get a little button. Let me move this up there. Right down there in the bottom, there's a little thing that says what current zoom level I'm at. Okay, it's a little blurry, but it's telling me 33.3, 25, 16. So it kind of snaps in increments of 15.5-ish, and 100%, 150 in kind of neat amounts. Okay, anyway, so we now have one layer in our layers panel, okay? It's the background layer, and you can see it's white. So we've got a blank project, we've got nothing going on here. So now I want you to create some layers so that you get a feel for how they work and how they stack up in this layers palette over here. Which one is the bottom one, which one is the top one?
Can we get images from Google?
Yeah, sure. Let's get some images from Google. Okay, so somebody pick a theme.
Panda.
What do we, a what? A
Panda.
panda.
Yeah.
Okay, panda. All right, we're going to do a theme by pandas. So open a Google window, okay, and just search for pandas. Pandas.
No, it's just chugging.
Oh.
I might need to make different. I mean, this works. This is not. No, it's just chugging.
Oh, do you want to try another one?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's find some images.
It's like,
So it just came out of it. It just turned.
That's fine. Pandas are animals too. There we go. One's giving the other one a backdrop or something.
oh, my God.
Sorry, you don't have
It's like to log in again.
Okay, so choose any image of a panda. Okay, yeah, this one.
Should it be high quality, so over 1,000?
No. We can use low quality pictures because it'll probably improve the performance of the. It'll probably make the program work a little bit easier. Okay, that's true of any program. And we're not going for quality right now. Okay, I just want you to get familiar with layers.
So, Tim, what was the size of your image?
It was a A4 landscape. Okay, so when you find a picture of a panda that you like, save that image. And I'm going to show you another way to put images into documents. I think we did this last week. Okay, I'm going to save it to my desktop. Pandas, all right, save. There we go. And if I don't want to now go into Photo P, okay, and I could take that pandas image from my from my desktop now, and I could drag it into Photo P, or I could go File, Open and Place. Okay, and then I could browse for the thing on my computer, and I could find it that way. If I go to Desktop, Pandas. Okay, there we go. It's going to put it in there for me. And now what it does is, because we have created an A4 document, a print document, okay, it has 300 DPI, so 300 dots per inch. Oh, okay, so go back to New Project, the one that you started there, and go to File, and go to Open and Place. You see, you got to go on now. Okay. If you go to just Open on the File menu, it's going to open a new document for you, okay, and you're going to have what... you're going to have two tabs up here. Okay, if I go File, Open, and I choose that pandas picture, okay, because maybe you want to start with a picture as the base of your document. You don't want to have to create a new one first, okay? Saves a bit of time sometimes. So just go to pandas and you go Open, okay? It's going to open it in a second tab in Photo P. Okay, there's my new project that I created. I didn't give it a name yet, and there's pandas.psd. Alright, so it was actually a JPEG image that I loaded, but as soon as I brought it into Photopea, it made it into a PSD file. So that if I were to go to File, Save as PSD, or Save PSD, either one will work right now because it's the first time we're doing it. Okay, you can choose a couple of options about it. I never change anything here. I just leave it all the way it is, and I go Save pandas.psd. It's telling me it's going to be 7.1 megs, so I just go Save. And there it is. Okay, it just saved that little 7 meg file to my downloads folder probably. Okay, but that's the difference between going File, Open. Okay, it will open any image file in a new tab for you here as if it was a new document that you want to work with. But if you go File, Open and Place, it won't create a new tab when you open that file. It will place it inside the document you already have open. Okay, so you can see here that this gives us a clue about the resolution of that image that I downloaded, because this is an A4 page, and we know because we set it up for print resolution, it's going to have 300 dots per inch. Okay, and basically 1 dot is 1 pixel. You can think of them interchangeably. So, so this is our A4 page here. Well, it's a little bit slanted, okay. And we've got 300 dots per inch. Now, the inch thing is a little bit irritating to get around, but basically we've got 297 millimeters, 210 millimeters. That's A4 page, right? Can somebody tell me what this is in inches? 210, 25.
In inches, it's 11.69 and 8.27.
8.27 inches, okay. So basically we've got almost 8 pieces over here, 8 inches here this way, so like 1, there, more or less 8 pieces here, as if it was a grid, okay. 8 inches that way by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, yeah. Okay, cool, by 11 inches this way, okay. And then we've got 300 dots inside each one of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 250, 250, 300. Okay, dots like that, or pixels per inch. And then we've got another 300 there, another 300 there, all the way along these 11 inches. And then we've got 300 going this way as well. Okay, this is a little square. 300, 300, 300, all the way going down there. So if you were to count all those pixels together, 300 now times 8.27. Anyway, you'd end up with a big number, like 3,000 something pixels. Okay, that's how many pixels you're dealing with inside this print document, because it's at 300 dots per inch. If we were doing a document that was just for screen, like let's say that's an image that's on a computer screen, okay, our screen is only so many, how big is the iPad screen? This is almost an A4 page. So you could say it's maybe, let's say it's a similar size as an A4 page, like a 19-inch screen. Okay, it's got the same measurements. It's about 11 inches by 8 inches. The difference is the resolution. This one is 300 DPI. Dots per inch. Okay, so for every inch there are 300 dots. This one, and this is good because it's going to be a nice crisp print. Okay, these dots are so small. I mean, the printer puts down 300 dots of ink for every 1 pixel in the document, pretty much. But the difference with the screen resolution is I only have 72 dots per inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 72, and 72 going this way. Okay. So although these things are the physical size of the real world, this is like roughly an A4 page, and you can print one and you can hold it up against this monitor. Although they're roughly the same size, okay, the resolution is different. The file that I printed had many, many more pixels in it. It had a much greater resolution because it was a 300 DPI versus a screen that's typically 72 DPI, although the dots are actually pixels. Okay, so just remember that. This document is going to be much bigger because it's like 72, it's 3, maybe 3.5, 4 times as many dots as this one. Okay, and if you try to print this at A4, believe me, if the printer only puts down 72 dots of ink instead of 300 in that same inch, you're going to see it. It's going to look pixelated and crap versus this nice crisp print at 300 dpi. Okay. So just to remind you of that, because that's pretty important. Okay. So I know I've got something that's probably quite a few pixels wide, or quite a few pixels high. If I want to check that, I can go to Image and just go to Image Size. Okay, or Canvas size. Let's see, how would I describe the difference for image size and canvas size? Okay, it doesn't matter. Let's just go to image size for now. There we go. It's actually telling me the width currently is 3,500 pixels by the height 2,480. So if I took 3,508 and divided it by 300 DPI, I'd basically get roughly how many inches wide the page is. Okay, so I can always work it backwards like that. So I'm not going to do anything about the image size. I actually just wanted to show you how many pixels were in this A4 landscape document. And remember that an A3 document is not twice the size. Oh, it is, sorry. It is twice the size of an A4 document. So So that resolution is going to be even bigger. So you're dealing with something that's maybe 7,000 pixels wide, okay, on one of its dimensions, if you do an A3 print layout. So lots of people complain like, geez, Photoshop is working really slow or something like that. But you have to understand that as soon as you start working with prints in mind, you are going to have big documents, especially if they have lots of high quality images in them. Because that's generally what you tend to do. If you're doing a visual composition, you're going to put lots of images in it, right? Maybe a little bit of text, but it will be predominantly all about the image. So there's a lot of information that you're saving. And every time you add a layer with a new piece of information, Photoshop is having to save, or Photopea in this case, having to save all that information, all those layers and those stacks into one single file. And that can take some time. So you just need to be patient with it sometimes. And save often, okay? This shit happens.
Open YouTube ad.
Hmm? Oh. Oh, it goes away.
Thank you, sorry.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, that was a roundabout way of just showing you that when I download this picture of a panda, and let me just go back to it. If I hover over here, 1,440 pixels by 858. Okay, so you can understand that when I opened and placed it at the same sort of scale as how many pixels there are in this document. Okay, I have about 3,000 pixels in this whole document, and that image of the panda was only about 1,300. Okay, and that's why it only takes up about just over a third of the page like that. Okay, so whenever you place a file like that, that is giving you basically a perfect pixel per dot representation of that resolution. So right now, without me having changed the size of this, if I wanted it to print at 300 DPI, I shouldn't make it any bigger than the way it has imported now. Okay, if I were to go to this thing and just notice over here that when we started with our background layer on the layers palette, we've now got a pandas one on top of it. Okay, that was when we went to open and place, that's the file we saved and put it in there. So if you want to now make this layer bigger, all right, and we are currently working on that layer because it's selected here in the palette, but I'm going to come back to this, okay? But if you wanted to make this layer bigger, just for now, you can go up to this very top tool at the top of the bar on the left, okay? It looks like it's called the Move tool, and you can hit V on your keyboard to go for it as well, okay, like a shortcut. And then you'll see that there is a little checkbox that appears above these document tabs called transform controls. Okay, so just tick that, and you'll see the little box appears around the edge of the panda's image. And then if you click on this corner, okay, you can scale it like this. So I'm clicking and I'm holding the mouse button in and I'm just dragging the image around. I can resize the image like this, okay, but it's going a little bit wonky. Like you can see that I'm squashing it there or I'm squashing it there. So if I want to make sure that I scale it perfectly proportionally, okay, and none of this weird distortion occurs, you just hold in the shift key, okay, and then when you start moving the mouse, you'll see that it gets locked at that particular ratio. Okay, I don't risk distorting the face because I've got the shift key held in. Right, then you can just let go of the mouse button when you're happy with the shape. Okay, and then you can either hit enter right now to accept that new scaling that you've done, or you can go up here and click the tick, okay, on the top. Just like that, okay, and it's basically just stuck the image there. It's frozen it. All right, but you'll see the bars are still there. Okay, so you can still carry on and adjusting this in and out. But then if you don't want to see those controls anymore, you can just go up there and tick transform controls, and then you can turn it off. All right, and there's another way to get to it as well, which we'll look at later. So you'll see we have a background layer now, and we have the pandas layer. Okay, so now that we have two layers in our document, I can show you some of the basic properties of layers. Right, you'll see that the bottom one is white. It's called background, that's the one we started with, and you can see it's got a little white rectangle next to it. That is actually a tiny little thumbnail preview. You know what a thumbnail is? Yeah? Okay, it's like your phone gallery. Those little, it's not the full picture, it's a little glimpse of the picture. Well, that's what that is there. Okay, so we have nothing on our background layer. It's plain white. That's why it just looks like a solid rectangle of white. But above it, we have a little pandas layer. Okay, that's the file we saved and opened. And we can see that in the top left corner of this little thumbnail image is that green stuff, which is the foliage I'm seeing here. Okay, so that is in fact a tiny little snapshot of this layer. And if we want to create another layer, a blank layer, okay, because by default, if you go down here and you go new layer like that, okay, you're going to put in a blank layer. And we don't see any change in the document, okay? It's not like any colors have changed. I still see the panda exactly where I left it. That's because this layer is blank. It's essentially a clean piece of glass that we've added on top of the stack of our other layers there. There's no information on it, except that it is a layer. All right, so it's not going to make any difference to the way we see the image. It's not until we put some content into that layer, like with a brush, or by pasting something else in, okay, or by using a paint bucket tool, that we will start to see a difference in our actual, in the way the visual composition looks. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's put some stuff onto layer 1. All right, and you'll see it's the topmost layer, and that's the way these layers work, okay? You're going to sort, they sort themselves so that the bottom layer is always on the bottom of the list, and the topmost layer is always on the top of the list. And that's the way layers will display as well. Okay, if I have something on layer 1 that is above the pandas layer, you'll see that information. It'll block out the panda layer. So let's just go to our brush tools. Brush tools, we're actually going to go into more detail in a few weeks' time, but for right now, it's pretty simple. So just go down to about midway down to your toolbar on the left there and go to brush tool, or you can hit B. Okay. Where did my brush go? Oh, it's very, very small. Okay. There it is. You can just see it. If I click and drag now, I'm doing like little stupid spirals on layer 1. Okay, but if you want to change the brush properties, which you most certainly do want to do at some point, okay, you can go over here to this little, next to the layers panel, there's a thin little one with these little abbreviated buttons here. Pro for properties, BRU for brushes. Okay, you can change the size over here. You can change the angle and roundness. There's a lot of settings we can play with there. Okay, these are the kind of the full fat advanced settings if you want to get into different brush effects and stuff like that. But the easiest way to just change the size or the pressure of the tip, okay, because it's kind of approximating what a brush would do in real life, but in a computer instead. Okay, it's not perfect, but if you just right click, this is the easiest way to get to the two basic settings for brushes, okay, which is size and hardness. So I think of hardness as that pressure, like how hard you're pressing with the brush. But it basically affects how fuzzy it is, if you want to think of it that way also. So I had my hardness set to 100% and my size was at 15 pixels, okay. So right now I'm using a little round brush, okay. I just know from experience that the default brush it gives you is normally a round brush. It's one of these ones that appear in the list, probably the first one. Okay, and those are some quick presets. So you can click around and choose a different brush tip shape and different hardness level, okay, they're built into these little presets. And it gives you a little preview of what that looks like. Most of them are round, but some of them will like stand up like that, like a chisel tip or a calligraphic pen or something like that. Okay, so have a look at what each one of them do. Choose a different brush by just clicking on it, and then just try and draw randomly over the pandas, okay?
On layer 1 or panda?
On layer 1, please. Okay, and if you're unsure what layer you're on, it's the one that looks highlighted in the list. And you can change layers by just clicking on them, okay? But do some stuff with brushes first before you change what layer you're on. Okay, I'm going to get into that now, shortly. So, what did I change? I didn't change much here. I'm going to make mine bigger. I'm going to increase the size to 137, and you'll see that now when I move my brush around the background here, I have this round circle, okay? And that corresponds to what size it is. The bigger the size, the bigger the circle. You can see it changing over there in the background, okay? So, I'm going to do mine. I'm going to leave it on 100% hardness, and I'm going to just draw a line over here. And you can see that it kind of looks a little bit jittery, like it's pasting 5 little circles on top of one another. Well, it is, okay. That's how it kind of fakes the effect of constant pressure. But you can change those little amounts of circles in the brush properties over here, but we'll go into that more detail when we get to that chapter. Right now I just want you to be creating some stuff on layer 1. So if I right click and just go and change my hardness to 0%, and now I use the same brush, you'll see how much more fuzzy that is. That's because of the hardness setting. Okay, and we can go and change the color over here as well, but we'll get into that later too. So now that you have some scribbles, okay, with the brush tool on layer 1, I want you to go and create another layer. Okay, so there are some layer controls down here. At the very bottom of this layers, let's call it a palette. Okay, at the bottom of the list there's some blank space because we haven't filled all the space with layers yet. And there's some basic little settings down here, and these we're going to come back to quite often, especially when you're working with layers and adjustments and stuff. Okay, but the one that's on the far right, okay, we read from left to right. I'm going to just discuss them going backwards. Okay, so from the far right hand side we've got delete layer. What this means is if I click this little trash can icon, it's going to delete layer 1. Okay, so I'm going to hit it there. Layer 1 disappeared, and you'll see that because I drew all that stuff on layer 1, it also got deleted when layer 1 got deleted. Okay, that was layer 1's content. And if I want to undo that, I can just hit Control Z, or I can go edit, step backwards. Okay, step backward in time. I can undo that last thing that I did, which was deleting the layer. And there it is. Layer 1's popped back into my little palette there. If I want to create a new layer, I just look to the left of that little trash can icon. It looks like a little page with the corner turned up. Okay, if I click that, it created a new layer for me, layer 2. Okay, that's wonderful. And we can rename that layer as well. All right, if you just double click on the text part of the layer where it says layer 2, you'll see it opens a little text box there, and you can just start typing in something else like my new layer, and you can hit enter or just click somewhere outside the text box. There you go. Now it's called my new layer. All right. And then if we look to the left again of that little new layer icon, we get one that looks like a folder. Okay, it's called new folder. And if you work with really complicated Photoshop documents and they have many layers in them, and maybe you have to collaborate with somebody else on that same document, okay, it helps to name your layers and to keep them organized in folder structures. Okay, and this folder structure is what's called a tree, basically. It's got little branches, and on the tip of those branches are little branches. And it's basically the same as your Windows Explorer. Okay, File Explorer. Is it opening there? There we go. Okay. You see all this stuff here, this is a tree, and you can expand and collapse the tree like this. Good grief, it's slow. Okay, there we go. And then you can also expand it, and you can look inside there. Nothing in there, desktop, nothing in there, touch designer. Okay, there we go. So you can look inside folders like this, and you can see that they just get indented, like a little bulleted list, okay? And that's exactly how folders and layers work over here. If I go to that little new folder button, I create one. It says folder 4, okay? And you can double click on the text of that folder to change its name as well. There we go. I'm just going to call it a Tim. And it's got nothing in it right now. You can see this little down arrow that's in front of the folder icon. It's pointing down, which means it is expanded, which means I should be able to see the contents of that folder. But I just created a new folder. There's nothing in it yet, right? If you want to put something in it, like my new layer, okay, I'm just going to click on my new layer to select it like that, and then I'm going to just click and drag it, and I'm going to drop it right on top of that Tim folder, and you'll see it just indented slightly there. Okay, it is now part of that folder. And if I take layer 1 and I just click and hold my mouse button in on layer 1 and drag it, I can either drag it into the Tim folder, and you'll see that it puts it in the folder. Whoops. Drag it onto the folder. There we go. It puts it in the folder, but it puts it at the top of the list. Okay. If it's now messed up the order of your layers, okay, and that will create like a visual problem in the final composition. You want that layer to be on top of the other one for a particular reason. Okay, so there shouldn't. If you want to just restore that order again, so that layer 1 was underneath my new layer, you can just grab it and move it down a little bit. Okay, there we go. And you'll see that there's a little gap between this little eyeball icon there, and it's kind of pushed in a little bit. Okay, that's because it's now part of that Tim folder. And if I click on that little down arrow next to Tim folder to collapse the folder. Otherwise, I can't see inside it anymore. All the layers that were in it just hide up inside it. Okay, the same way that files and everything. If I just collapse this one, there we go. You don't see them anymore. Okay, so it's exactly the same principle. And if you want to see inside it again, just click that little arrow so that it points down, and you can see the layers that are in there. Okay, so you can just go and create new folders as well. I can put a folder within a folder even. Okay, and I can put more files in there or more layers in there if you want to organize things. Like you could have a folder that says sketches, you know, and so you scanned in all your sketches and you put them in that folder. And if you have some renders, you could put them inside a renders folder. Okay. Generally, you're not going to use them too often because you're going to use them when you have a lot of layers and you need a lot of organization. Generally, you're the only person working on the document. Okay, so as long as it makes sense to you, that's fine. But if you ever have to give it to somebody else, it helps to rename your layers. And sometimes I even forget. Sometimes because the thumbnail image is so small, if you have a tiny little piece of color on a layer, you won't even see it in the thumbnail. Okay, so then me looking at something that just says layer 1 or layer 42, okay, it doesn't really express what's on that layer. So then I would give it a name. Okay, that's just layer organization. Okay, so there I created my folder 6. Anyway, I don't want that folder, so I can actually undo that. I can go step backwards and you'll see that it just took that folder away. Or I could just delete that folder. Okay, I could select it and then click the little trash bin icon and delete it like that. So that's a couple of ways to organize layers, okay, just by naming them or creating folders for them, moving them around. And if you want to move them outside of this folder now, okay, I just grab that layer and I move it above the folder, or I move it down underneath the pandas layer somewhere else there. Okay, I basically drag it outside of that folder or any of the files that are already in the folder. And then I'm going to take this one and also drag it out just underneath there. Wait, no, it didn't do it. There. Okay, and now I've got that empty folder. I can actually delete it, but there's nothing in it, so I'm just going to leave it there. Okay. Now you'll see my pandas is now on the, it's switched places with my new layer. Okay. Originally layer 1 was on top of it. So if I go over here to my move tool again, just in the toolbar, or V key. Okay. I want to take this pandas layer, so I'm going to make sure I'm on it by selecting it in the layers list here. And you'll see that it shows a little dotted outline around that thumbnail. That's another reminder that you are currently working on that layer, that's the layer that's been selected. And now if I go over to the panda over here and I just click and drag, I can move it around the space, okay? And you'll see that it's covering up those brushes that I was testing out in layer 1, okay? That is because pandas is now the topmost layer, and layer 1 is only just above the background. That's why this is obscuring layer 1. Okay, if I want it the other way around, if I want the brushes on top of the panda, I need to move it so that the panda is either underneath the brushes by putting it down there, okay, and I have the other layers on top of it. Or if I hit Control Z to undo that, I could take my layer 1 and just move it a couple places up the stack so that it sits on top of pandas. Oops, I put it inside a folder. Okay, I'm going to move it out. This folder's irritating me. I'm just going to select it and delete it. And I'm going to move layer up more above pandas. There we go. Okay, so there, they both did the same thing. Right, but that's just a quick visual difference of what the difference it makes when one layer is on top of another one versus the other way around. Okay, so let's have a look at some basic layer properties. Okay. Oh wait, we were going through the thing at the bottom here. Folders, okay, the rest are to do with masking and adjustments, so we'll ignore those for now. Okay, but the basic layer ones are these 3 over there. These are special kinds of layers. So if you want to turn a layer off, okay, in other words, you want the content to be there so you can turn it on and off selectively. You don't want to delete the layer, but you just don't want to see it. You can just click the little eye icon next to it, okay. So when I click it on layer 1, it disappears. And if I click on pandas, that disappears as well. And I'm basically left with just my background layer. If I turn the eyeball off on background, you'll see it gives me this grid pattern, okay? And this is how the computer is telling you that this area is transparent. Remember that you can have transparency in digital images. It's that 4th color channel, okay? RGB are the first 3, red, green, blue. And then like a PNG file format, something that allows transparency. Okay, then you have that fourth channel, which is the transparency channel. And that's what you're seeing here. Wherever you see this pattern, it means that this part of the image is transparent. A JPEG, for example, does not support transparency. So you would not be able to save this like a big transparent image like this. You'd have to save it as a PNG or a PSD or something like that. Okay. Anyway, but those are less common for file formats. So we've turned off everything. Okay, I've got my new layer showing, but there was nothing on there anyway. So whether I turn it on or off, it makes no difference. There was no content on that layer to begin with. And then if I want to turn everything back on, I can just turn these eyes back on. Okay. So let me actually for a moment turn everything off except the layer 1 where I was testing the brushes. Okay, so I can actually, if you want to turn off a whole lot of layers in one sweep, okay, you don't have to click the eyeball individually. You can just click and hold, and drag the mouse downwards over the layers you want to turn off, and they all turn off one by one as you move over them. Okay, so you'll see this is the content that is only on layer 1. It was a blank layer to begin with. It wasn't even a plain white background. It was completely blank when we made it. Then we took our brush tool and we made these markings on it over here, okay. But we never did anything else to the background of it. We never filled in the background or anything. And so that's why when we turned off the background layer in our document, we see this grid pattern. It's telling us that this is all transparent. So if I were to leave these layers turned off and to save this as a PNG file, it would be transparent in all these areas where you see this grid. Okay, and then you would just see these kind of patterns like this. And transparency doesn't have to be on or off. It doesn't have to be completely transparent or completely opaque. Opaque means like you can't see through it, okay? It can be like a gradient. It can be like a range in between completely on and completely off, so that you have subtle transparency where things seem to fade like that. Okay, so that's totally possible as well. And that may come useful when definitely when you're trying to blend images on top of one another, but also if you're creating PNGs for maybe your own website design or something like that. PNGs are quite useful because of that transparency, especially with sketches and things that have white backgrounds. So, okay, so there you go. You turn a couple layers on, you turn a couple of them off. Okay, so I'm going to turn them all back on again. And then if you want to lock a layer, for example, you can choose 4 ways in which to lock a layer. And these are accessible just above the layer list. It says lock, and then there are 4 little icons there. And if you look at the first icon on the left, it says transparency. If I click this, you'll see that little lock icon appears next to layer 1. Okay, that was the layer I had selected. And then I locked to transparency. That means that if I were to go to these opacity or fill controls, which is another properties of layers, which we'll look at next, okay? Oh, it does actually work.
No, it shouldn't.
No, it shouldn't. Interesting. No, I mean, I did lock the transparent. It's supposed to be locked. Okay, anyway, look, I don't think I've ever used that transparency lock before. Okay, there we go. Locked for editing. Right, oh, locked for pixels. Okay, so this means I shouldn't be able to edit any of the pixel content that's on here. I can move the layer around like this, but I shouldn't be able to add anything to it. There, you see. I took the brush tool and I tried to paint onto it, and it gave me a warning there that said this layer is locked. Okay. If you lock the pixels, it means that it won't let you change any of the content that's on the layer, but it will let you move it around. Okay, so you can lock layers individually like this if you have a document with many layers in it and you're worried that you might accidentally click on something or mess up the content on the bottom layers. You can lock them like that. I seldom use this function, to be honest, because most of my documents are probably like less than 10 layers. So if you just want to lock all the properties, you just go to the padlock icon, okay? And that will make sure that the layer can't get moved, it can't get deleted, you can't accidentally erase part of the image or add anything to it or screw up the colors or the tinting or anything like that, okay? If you want to lock an image, basically just use the padlock icon. It locks all those things. These are, I think you will rarely use these, okay? And then when it is locked and you can't do any of those things, and you'll get a notification that will say this layer is locked. Okay, oops, I select the long one, this one there. Well, in this case, if I try to move it, it just won't let me. It's only when I select the pandas layer. Yeah, it won't even let me select it. Okay, but you can just click that lock icon again when the layer is selected to unlock it, and then you can completely go ahead and edit it all over again. Okay, and then we have something called fill and opacity. So they seem to function the same, okay, but there's a small difference because you can put certain properties onto layers. Okay, things like stroke effects and a drop shadow or something like that. So we can experiment with that in a little bit. But let me just show you for now. Let's take the pandas layer. So I'm just going to select the pandas layer and I'm going to go to opacity, 100%. Okay, this basically sets the overall transparency of this layer. Okay, it affects everything that's on the layer uniformly. It's different from using a transparency in a gradation, I suppose. Okay. It's kind of, and it's got the slider over here, and if you just click and drag the slider, you can change the opacity all the way from 0%, in other words, 0% of the image is showing, so nothing. Okay, all the way up to like 6, 7, you can start to see it just fading in. Okay, 20% opacity, and then all the way to 100 like that. Okay, so that's a very simple way to blend images, but there are special blending modes that you can use that will change the way layers appear on one another. Okay, and that's a useful thing to use as well. Okay, but that's the opacity little function there in percentage, and underneath it is fill, and you can use that slider, and it works almost the same. Okay, but there's a small difference. If I go to layer 1 here, and I just double click not on the text of layer 1, but on the thumbnail part. Okay, it opens up something called layer styles here. Okay, did you all manage to do that? Okay, layer styles. And you can see that I've got a list of different layer styles here on the side. And there's a little square box there. These little check boxes, okay. So if you want to turn on a particular style, and you can have more than one turned on, you can choose a tick box for something like drop shadow, okay. So I'm going to go down and tick drop shadow. There we go, and then it applies the default drop shadow underneath all the elements on that layer, okay? And if I want to configure the drop shadow, I just click on the text drop shadow, and then I get into the options for it, okay? And then we can change the way the blends, but we'll get into that later. I can change the opacity of the drop shadow, like in other words, how dense is that shadow? Does it block out everything that the shadow falls on? Or do you kind of see the objects that are underneath it? In other words, the other layers. So you can change that by changing the opacity of the drop shadow. Okay, and you'll see that it's changing it over there. It's looking like a softer gray color. But if I increase the opacity up to say 79, I get a darker, kind of more charcoal colored shadow underneath there. Okay, is that working for everyone? Are you seeing the shadow come out? Yeah. Are you sure you're on layer 1? You're on the pandas there, okay, but you can still see what it's doing there. Okay, you can see that there's a drop shadow appearing. And mine is falling to the bottom left here, okay, as if the light source was here. And that you can control with that little angle setting. Looks like a little wheel, it says 30 degrees right now. And if I change that to 95 or 118, you can see the direction of which the shadow is cast changes based on that angle. Okay, and then you can increase the distance. So this would make the object that you have the drop shadow around seem as if it's floating above the other layers. It's a very old school effect. Okay, you can use it well, and it is still used, but I think it's a lot more subtle these days. It was a bit like Comic Sans back in the day. Like drop shadows were like the thing. Okay, but it's kind of dying out now. So use them sparingly, all right? But if I increase the distance control over here, you'll see that the shadow distance increases. Okay, it makes it look like the object is almost taller, or that it's floating higher above the other layers. And it's just basically adding a form of contrast to your image to make it seem like it's popping off. Okay, like it's a bit of a gimmick. And then you can change the spread over here, which is how dense the shadow is. It's a little bit like how hard the edge of the shadow is. Okay, you can see it changing under there. Now this is a hard thing to try and approximate because it has a very soft edge. Okay, so how does a soft edge cast a shadow? Okay, well Philippi is trying to figure it out there for you. So it's not perfect with fuzzy edges, but it works better with hard edged objects. Okay, and then you can increase the size up here as well. If I just click on the slider, there we go, you can see the size of the shadow is becoming bigger, but it's also becoming blurrier as well. Okay, and then I can take the distance right down. So you can really play with the lots of little settings around just the drop shadow itself. Okay, and then I could go and add something else to that, like a stroke. And a stroke is basically another word for an outline. It's the best way to think of it. So let me click on stroke up here. Size 3. Oh, and you can see that as soon as I clicked on stroke, it automatically ticked it. It turned it on for me. And now if I look at the bottom of my document here, I can see that there is a thin little red outline around these objects. Okay, this is nice and thin because this is a hard-edged object, but you can see where I put that fuzzy brush down, it's having a hard time figuring out that edge there. It seems to be blending it in. Okay, and that's normal. But you can change the color and the size of this outline over here. Okay, so at the moment it's 3 pixels wide. That's how thick the outline is. And if I change that slider up to 48, you can see it's giving me a much thicker outline. Okay, so you can build some basic little effects like this by using this effect. And then you can combine it with the drop shadow. You can see my drop shadow is still there, but I'm also using the stroke effect. Okay, and you can choose if you want the position of the outline to be on the outside of the object, or if you want it to be on the center of the edge. And you'll see that it gets a little bit further in when I select center. There we go. Or on the outside. Okay, which will put it to the outside of the edge. And that basically means that if you have an object like this, okay, and then you imagine putting an outline around that object. That outline can sit on the outside edge of the object like that. Okay, and if we zoomed into this area like this, okay, imagine this is an object. The outline either sits here on the outside, and it's like that thick, or if you choose inside, the outline sits here on this part of the object and actually starts covering up the inside contents over here. Or if you have center, it basically puts it right on the center like that. This whole thing. Moves it up a little bit. But as you use it, it will make more sense. Okay, so you can choose the position of where you want to put that output. And then you can give things an inner shadow as well. So I'm gonna have stroke on, I'm gonna turn that off. You can do things in inner shadow, which makes it seem like rather than popping off the page, they are indented. Doesn't always work so great, okay? It's not a super amazing effect, it's a bit cheesy. And color overlay and things like that. So if you want to quickly change the color of a layer, doesn't matter what color of the brush you've used, you can quickly just paint everything with a particular color. And that you do with color overlay. Okay. I'm not going to go into all of these, I don't think you'll use them that often. Okay, and then when you're done configuring all your layer styles, you've got the certain ones that you want ticked, and you've configured their options and you're happy with it, just click OK. And then when you return back to the layer palette here, you'll see that it says EFF. That's a little abbreviation for effects over there. Okay, and then there's a little arrow next to it. If you click on that arrow, you can expand all the effects that you have added to this layer. Okay, in other words, those layer styles. And then you can turn those on and off individually as well, as if they were little layers within a layer. Okay, so if I decide I don't want to see the drop shadow anymore, I don't need to delete that drop shadow because maybe I spent a lot of time configuring the angle and the density and all of that stuff. I can just click the little eyeball icon next to drop shadow, and then I can turn off just that drop shadow effect for the layer, okay, and you can see it disappeared there. And if I turn off color overlay, it'll take away that red that I put over there, like that, okay. And then if I ever want to add some more effects, I just double click on the thumbnail part of the image, I go back to layer styles, and I add some more in there. Right. So that's one way to change the appearance of layers, and also you can see an example of how these effects build up and how they appear in your layer list. And you can also delete them like that as well. If I select inner shadow, I can click and drag it down here to the trash can to drop it in there, or I can just make sure it's selected, and oh no, that deletes the whole layer. Okay, but you can drag and drop an individual one into the trash can and delete the effects one by one like that as well, like miniature layers. Okay. So if you want to duplicate a layer, in other words, you want the panda image twice because you want to flip it or put it in another direction, something like that, I can just select that layer, or actually I can select the layer and then click and drag it onto the new layer icon. And when you do that, it'll create a copy of that layer. Okay. So as soon as I let go with my mouse button, it made another layer on top of pandas called pandas copy. Okay, and I can duplicate that one as well. I can click on it, and I can go down here onto layers, new layers, and let go, and there, pandas copy 2. Right, so I can make new layers like that. Also, okay, it's 10 o'clock. Do you want to take a break? Yeah. So how's it going though? I mean, do you finding this hard, or easy, or somewhere in between? Time consuming. Okay, like practice. Okay, makes everything faster and easier. After the more you use it, the less you have to think about it. Become like second nature. Okay, we'll do a little tutorial today. It'll be so basic. Oh my gosh, it'll be easy. Yeah. Okay. So let's be back here at 5 past.